All right, so this is going to be an overview of creatine. It's going to focus on creatine monohydrate because that's the most studied creatine supplement, as you'll see in the paper that we view. So here's the molecular formula: 4 carbon, 11 hydrogen, 3 nitrogen, and 3 oxygen. Here's the structure, and I'll put in a video of the rotating structure, hopefully right above me, right here. All right, so let's get to this paper. So I'm just going to review this one paper because it's a meta-study, which is a study that uses all the other studies. So it's basically a review of a bunch of studies to kind of get the concise overview of what all the research says, which is why meta-studies are much better than single studies, as I've noted throughout this paper, and it notes itself when it's reviewing other papers. So I'm going to review this one paper, and then if I leave it in the video, you can see all the other tabs or other papers that I downloaded, which I will link to in the description, so you can read this one plus all of the other ones that I've read. So the abstract, so it's saying that creatine monohydrate, which again is what we're going to study. Most studies are focusing on performance as well as health. And obviously many versions exist, but most of the time it's creatine monohydrate. And this is saying in the abstract of the meta study, reviewing all of the data shows that creatine regularly shows an increase in strength, fat-free mass, and muscle morphology, as long as it's coupled with resistance training. So, and it may benefit high-intensity sprints, which we'll see. It shows it does benefit high-intensity sprints, almost on par as the improvements for resistance training. Because, I mean, obviously, if you look at a bodybuilder and then look at a sprinter and then look at a marathoner, the sprinter is going to look closer to the bodybuilder than or at least a natural bodybuilder than a marathon runner would. So even though it's different modalities, the time frames are the same, which, as we'll see throughout all of the stuff that I review about muscles, time under tension and activities and anaerobic versus aerobic energy pathway to activate it, by and large. So there's differences, but overall this is just my first video, so this is going to be very broad and not super in-depth. All right, so we have it here that obviously by adding creatine through supplementation, it increases creatine storage, and creatine is used to regenerate the ATP, adenosine triphosphate, between high intensity exercises. So this allows the body to have more ATP available, which is a storage form of energy. So the cells convert ATP to the ADP, so they break off a phosphate group that releases energy for the cells to use for whatever they're doing, and in this case it's for resistance training. So the musculoskeletal system is using the ATP, converting it to ADP in order to recruit more muscle fibers or fire the muscle fibers more completely. And so by replenishing the ATP, you have more energy, so therefore you'll be able to do more work, which will create more of an impetus for your body to change and adapt to that. So again, I believe with the creatine supplementation as well as the protein or the program that you're going to be using with it, consistency is key. So it's all about consistently taking the creatine so that you have a consistent level of creatine within your body in order to use it, as well as consistently putting your body under the stress of resistance training so that it has a constant reason to change and build that muscle, and then to keep that muscle. So again, also with protein, that's like the whole anabolic window after a workout. It's not actually a thing. I do it just because it's a simple thing and it's kind of a reward after my workout. But it's also a good simple way, because I just have a protein shake of, I know after workout for about 30 minutes I'm going to be too overheated to truly sit down and have a real meal, so I'm going to have a protein shake as a quick way to get protein in. but that's not to actually feed the muscles immediately. That's to keep my protein and amino acid level of the body at the same level and have it high enough to use. So this is saying that 95% of the body's creatine stores are found in skeletal muscles. So, I mean, this could be a reason that you see most of the response from using creatine is when it's coupled with a program that stimulates the use of skeletal muscles. And as we'll see later, even though there's 5% throughout these 4 organs, there's actually a little brain benefit. So, and then obviously, since creatine is present in meats, vegetarians have a lower resting creatine level in their body, which actually will show later on that if vegetarians take creatine supplementation, they actually get more benefit from it simply because they have a lower level in their body. So this is actually pretty interesting. So the mechanisms by which creatine acts in the human body to improve physical and cognitive performance are still not clear. So I always love it when I find stuff that works in the real world, but it's not scientifically proven yet. So the same is true for, I take Epsom salt baths if I'm really sore. So I use the Epsom salt that's mixed in with the lavender, which the lavender smell has a calming effect on you. And so by using the Epsom salt when I'm sore and I know that I need to recover, by combining it with a scent that is known to calm people and put you in a more relaxed state, it's going to promote recovery. So, I mean, for something like the Epsom salt bath, it could be as simple as that. But for creatine, which has been proven over, decades with double-blind studies, we know that it's not placebo effect. So I think it's super interesting that people still don't know the exact mechanism by which it achieves these results. All right, so here's the first little subsection. So the documented effects of creatine supplementation on physical performance. So obviously, if you're supplementing with creatine, you increase the body's creatine pool. And then this one has, so all of the studies, or most of the studies, she should never say all, show a positive relationship between muscle creatine uptake and exercise performance. So since creatine is used to promote the availability of ATP, it makes sense that if you have more creatine up to the saturation level, and you're getting it you're going from a normal basal level to your saturation level, and you can still use the creatine, then that would make more ATP available. So then you have higher energy, so you can do more work and then provide more of a stimulus for the body to perform. So creatine has what's called a loading period, and we'll get into that a little bit later. There's a different type of loading period that may work better, but it's more of how often throughout the day, not the amount or how long to do the loading period. So as stated, this one has a week-long loading period, 25 grams per day. So there's a breakdown later on that has grams per kilogram of body weight per day. But this one just did 25 grams per day in the loading period, and then 5 grams for the maintenance. So you're basically just inundating your body with a ton of creatine, which you actually get rid of a decent amount of that, filling up your body to saturation, and then each day you give it's basically the daily supply. The positive effects were attributed to an increased total creatine pool, resulting in more rapid ATP regeneration between resistance training sets, allowing athletes to maintain a higher training intensity and improve the quality of the workouts along the entire training period. So obviously, more creatine equals more ATP, which equals more energy, which equals more work done, which will equal better results. And as I stated right here, this is why creatine equals gains. So you can see that this meta study says that there's increase in absolute strength, so 1 rep max, so the most amount of weight you can do for 1 rep, as well as increases, which is actually more percentage increase in endurance strength, which is just picking a percentage of this 1 rep max and then doing it for the most amount of times that you can do it. And right here it says contradicting studies have reported no effects of creatine supplementation on strength performance. So it doesn't say how many, but I would say that that's in the minority. So again, this is a meta study, and this one is so it's referencing a single study right here, and it's only saying a few studies. So I wish they would give you the number, but they don't. This meta study is actually really good because it goes through, and while it's short on information over here, like the exact number of studies that contradict the creatine working, they do go through and work on and point out flaws in other systems. So this other study, this next one, the Beeman et al., that they were looking at, that said there was no improvement from creatine alone or when it was combined with whey protein for improving strength and muscle mass in 14 weeks, doing a 14-week long workout regimen that worked out 3 days a week in older men. So, which would be great if they could get higher strength, because squat strength is directly related to quality of life as you get older, because obviously squatting directly relates to whether you can stand up or sit down on your own. So they show this study, and then they go through and note that the creatine supplementation was only administered on the training days. So the participants only got creatine 3 times a week, and they don't know that that was enough to keep that level high enough to where it would do anything, to where it was actually creating a cellular difference in the individuals. So there's the meta study. People are saying that the reason this study showed no difference between the placebo and the creatine is because there was none in the body of these older individuals. This just goes through and says what they think the cellular reason that high creatine levels stimulate muscle growth. So, and then this just sums it up. So, in spite of a few controversial results, it seems that creatine supplementation combined with resistance training would amplify performance enhancement on maximum and endurance strength, as well as muscle hypertrophy. So they're saying not endurance. This is just basically lifting endurance. So it's saying maximum, so that's the 1 rep max, and then endurance strength, which was the picking a percentage of your 1 rep max and then doing it for X as many times as you can. And then muscle hypertrophy is just the higher size. So hyper is above or greater, hypo is under. So hypoglycemia is low blood sugar, hypertension is high blood pressure. And then this next section is working on anaerobic exercise, which is the short. So anaerobic means non-oxygen based. So this is using the short pathway for something like lifting, sprints, something short term like that. In the previous meta-analysis, creatine supplementation has the most pronounced effect on short-term duration, high-intensity intermittent exercises. So that checks out with everything that we've read so far. So now it breaks down to hypertrophy. So this is how big your muscles get and how better they look. So this one study, again, it's just one study. So they had greater improvements on 1 rep max, lean body mass, fiber cross-sectional area. So that's each muscle fiber. So if they have a larger cross-sectional area, obviously your muscles will be bigger. And contractile protein in trained young males. So, and this is just saying when resistance training was supplemented with creatine. I think it was just creatine. Oh, yeah, it's creatine and protein and carbs. So this will be a good point to say creatine is a supplement. If you eat like crap and take creatine, you may see some results, but it won't be as good as if you're eating a good balanced healthy diet. And that's different for everyone depending on your goals and depending on your specific body. So that's what basically everything in health and training and nutrition is. The answer is it depends. So because everyone's individual, there's overarching general themes, but again, it depends on your goal. Obviously someone someone who wants to gain muscle is going to eat differently than someone who just wants to gain weight is going to eat drastically different than someone who wants to lose weight. So it's all different and interrelated. So the best analogy that I've heard repeatedly is that supplements, creatine included, are like a supercharger or a turbocharger. They're great if your engine is running really well and it's tuned and it's in good shape. But if your engine is in terrible shape, you can put a supercharger or a turbocharger and it's not going to do diddly. So again, here's the breakdown of this one study. Was doing 0.1 gram per kilogram of body weight per day of creatine and 1.5 grams per kilogram per day of protein and carbohydrates. So this is reporting on the methodology of the previous study. This one is just cellular interconnect, like molecules that are connected to the creatine, and they're just saying why, like what they think is happening and what's reported. So muscle insulin-like growth factor increases with creatine supplementation. So that makes sense. So, and here again, so vegetarians within a supplementation group had the largest increase of lean mass compared to non-vegetarians. So basically because they're walking around and they have their set body mass from having a super low amount of creatine, by adding creatine and going from, they're going from, a base working level normally to vegetarians are at, probably pretty close to zero because they're not eating meat, and that's where most of the creatine that we get comes from. So they went from basically, trying to function without creatine to saturation levels. So basically their body was super efficient, and then it got provided with much more ATP, so obviously it could do a lot more, and then changed the most. All right, so here's the first interesting one, is predominantly aerobic exercise. So this is the longer duration exercise. So think about like walking, running, jogging, rowing, something like that you do for a long time. So this is the first interesting subsection. So this is going to talk about predominantly aerobic exercise. So that's going to be the longer duration exercises such as walking or jogging, running in the traditional sense, not like running sprints or anything like that. So it's a longer term aerobic exercise. So as stated, there's some evidence that it improves endurance activities. So this is just going through saying how they believe that it'll change endurance performance. So this is another one that they observed a decrease in blood lactate accumulation. So by holding off lactic acid or blood lactate, then you won't have to work as hard to work out. And so by lowering the intensity and the difficulty, therefore, you'll be able to go longer. You'll be able to get a better performance from it. So, and then I'll be honest, I didn't even look up what the ventilatory threshold was. All right, so this section is creatine supplementation on glycogen stores. I really don't care about this. Maybe if I do a more in-depth video, I'll come back and check the glycogen stores. But it's a pretty short section, and I don't really care because that's not why I'm doing it. So that's more in-depth on what it's doing on a cellular level. And again, this is just a broad overview of what creatine does. So the next subsection is to improve recovery from injury, muscle damage, and oxidative stress induced by exercise. So this is seeing if creatine can help you recover from anything you do while exercising. So this is saying that an immobilization period can be offset by a common loading creatine supplementation protocol. So that's basically saying that as you're So as you're not doing anything, you slowly lose what muscle you've built or endurance that you've built, and by supplementing with creatine, that this will slow that. It won't prevent it, but they're saying that this one study, again, one study, not meta-study, saw that it slowed. So this other study saw a decrease in these markers for muscle damage. So creatine kinase, lactate dehydrogenase, aldolase, glutamic oxaloacetate, oxaloacetic acid, transaminase, and glutamic pyruvic acid transaminase. So again, it was only 4 athletes, but from what I can tell, they don't say whether there were more. So I think they saw it in all 4 athletes, and they had just done an Ironman, which is super intense. So this is just saying, I thought this was pretty interesting, that creatine actually has antioxidant effects. So which, if you're going to take it every day if you're going to take it every day, that's super interesting that it's also an antioxidant. So this is a pretty short section, which I didn't even think about, was creatine supplementation on range of motion. So they saw that there was a decrease in range of motion in, I think it was only 2 studies that they saw, but both of them said there was a decrease, which, if you think about it, you're increasing the workload that you're doing. So your muscles are going to get torn more during the workout. So they're going to be torn, so you're not going to want to move that way. So you'll be more sore, and they're going to be building size. So muscle hypertrophy is going up, so they're getting bigger, and that's not going to help you with your range of motion. So, and this is just saying that one of the studies, so they put forward 2 possible theories as to why the range of motion didn't decreased and didn't at least stay the same. So saying that since the supplementation increases intracellular water content, so that increased the muscle size, but it also increased the muscle stiffness and resistance to stretch. So then neural outflow from the muscle spindles is affected due to an increased volume of the muscle cell. So again, so the water retention effect of creatine increases the size, increases the muscle stiffness, so that keeps it from, so that decreases your range of motion. So they did note that in the studies, they tested the range of motion immediately after the loading phase. So maybe going from whatever level the participants were at before and then increasing to the saturation level caused the muscles to become super stiff, and then as you keep the maintenance phase, your muscles get more adjusted to it and get more back to their normal elasticity. So, and then this gets into the more the less studied aspects of creatine, I'd say. So it's health and clinical settings. So it's neurological and cognitive function being improved by creatine supplement. And so they're saying that it has been shown to increase or improve, which I thought was pretty interesting. So this is saying, remember, musculoskeletal system has 95% of the creatine, and then 5% is spread out between those 4 organs, one of which is the brain. And so these studies are showing that the higher the brain creatine content, it shows improved neuropsychological performance. So, and then this was super interesting because since virtually no one gets enough sleep, I thought it was interesting that that if your cognitive processes are limited due to your sleep deprivation, or through aging, which we're all aging at the same time, that creatine supplementation can improve that. So even if you're not working out and trying to get super big or anything like that, you could take creatine if you're not getting enough sleep, or as you're aging to improve or at least curb the negative effects on your mental facilities. So, which I thought that was super interesting. Again, at least for the sleep, it would be much better if you could get your sleep, but creatine creatine will actually slow that down. So that's another check in the pro column for creatine. And then they showed for older adults, creatine showed improvements in fatigue resistance, which again, it showed up here. Strength, which has been proven. Muscle mass, proven. So the bone mineral density I thought was interesting. So because as you get older, your bones get more brittle, and so you're more likely to have breaks. And so I'd be interested to see if the creatine supplementation, since it improves bone mineral density, if that improves bone density overall, or if that improves the brittleness or elasticity. Even though bones aren't really thought of as being elastic, they can give a little bit. And so I would be interested to see if creatine supplementation would affect that and decrease, instead of falling and breaking your hip, you take creatine and you fall and you bruise your hip and then you bitch about it the next day in the gym. I think everyone would be a lot better if we could decrease those. So this is another note that the meta study people writing this study say about the studies that they're reviewing, and note that that there are discrepancies between studies, and again, we don't know the exact way creatine works, especially in the brain. So they're saying that might be due to diet, race, and supplementation protocol. So obviously your genetic makeup is going to affect how well you respond or lack thereof to creatine. So obviously that's going to affect how the results of any study. And then I like this one, with animal, which we test everything on animals. And then we use cellular models to test supplements as well. And so they showed positive effects of creatine ingestion for neurodegenerative diseases. So they don't really go into depth on how well they worked. But there are other studies that I'll have linked, and I think one of them explored neurodegenerative diseases. So it'd be interesting to see if creatine keeps your brain working as you age, then obviously it's going to work to prevent and possibly reverse, at least a little bit, neurodegenerative diseases. So then this is a little controversial, is creatine use in children and adolescents. So I know for myself, I didn't use creatine until after 18, which the supplementations on most of them, they say not to use it under 18. And this right here is the only reason. So the only reason it's not recommended is because it hasn't been studied, and therefore they don't know that there are no negative effects of creatine. And then a more speculative, less concrete reason for younger athletes to not take creatine is that it would basically create a positive relationship between the athlete and taking performance enhancing things, and this would make them more susceptible to taking something like anabolic steroids. And as noted in the meta study, they say that it's just speculation, so it's not the main one. So the main reason is because the safe use of creatine has not been established, and that's the main reason. And again, they note that they sent out a questionnaire to see how many children used creatine, and so the results from that could be skewed because it's just a questionnaire. So this is good for any results you see. If it's a questionnaire, look for a more robust study. And just this paragraph says that children genetic makeup is a little bit different than adults, and so they'll see great response from taking creatine, but this is also just saying that this adaptation can be achieved just through training, so they shouldn't necessarily take creatine. So, and then this just lays out guidelines to taking creatine if they're that young. So, and then how much creatine to take. So this is just saying that what the typical supplementation for creatine is. So you have a loading phase of 20 grams of creatine monohydrate per day, or 0.3 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. So because the general recommendation of 20 grams is for like the average adult. So I know for the males, the average height is like 5'9". So if you're over or under that by more than about an inch, I would do the measurement yourself. And this study says the 0.3 grams per kilogram works. So, and then after your loading phase, you do 3 to 5 grams of creatine monohydrate per day, or 0.03 grams of creatine monohydrate per kilogram of body weight per day for the duration of the supplementation period. And we'll talk about the supplementation period later on because there's also some controversy there. Not super controversial, but a little bit. So this one was interesting. And so they were doing the same, the study found they were doing the same amount of creatine, but they, instead of taking, I think it was 4 daily intakes of 5 grams, this study did 21 gram doses. And so they spread out how many times you took it throughout the day, and they spread out your intake of creatine throughout the day, and they found that less creatine was being excreted. So they believe that you retain more creatine by doing slowly throughout the day instead of taking 3 to 5 big groupings of creatine and losing a lot more. So and again, if you retain more creatine, then you're going to see more results quickly, or more. You're going to see the same results, but you're going to see them more quickly. And then this section. And then this section is responders versus non-responders. So I didn't go into that because this is just for the general. I mean, you can read it if you want. So basically their synopsis was that, here we go. Responders are those individuals with lower initial level of total muscle creatine content. Okay. All right. So for responders versus non-responders, they're saying that if you don't respond to creatine supplementation, it's because you get enough through your diet. And that's pretty much it. So then we go into the different forms of creatine available. So creatine anhydrous is without hydrous, which we're talking about creatine monohydrate. So it has one water molecule on it. So creatine anhydrous is without the water molecule. So then you have salt forms, which is creatine pyruvate, creatine citrate, creatine malate, creatine phosphate, magnesium creatine, creatine oroate, crealkaline, which is the creatine with baking soda. There's creatine in ester form, creatine ethyl ester, creatine gluconate, creatine effervescent, which is creatine citrate or creatine monohydrate with citric acid and bicarbonate. All right, so this is just saying that the creatine salts have been shown to be less stable than creatine monohydrate. And so as they say it up here, there needs to be more research to make sure that they're safe, because it just hasn't been researched enough. So, and this is saying that the addition of carbohydrates could increase their stability. Again, more research needed. And then this one, so again, it's one study, but that the ethyl ester was not as effective as creatine monohydrate to enhance serum and muscle creatine stores, and it had no additional benefits for body composition, muscle mass, strength, and power. This one was interesting. So it shows that creatine monohydrate produces significantly greater improvement in mean power and body weight, while both creatine monohydrate and polyethylene glycosylated creatine showed significantly greater improvement for strength when compared to the control group. So basically it's saying that they had similar results, but through the polyethylene glycosylated creatine, you didn't increase body weight, but you had improvements in strength, and that there was up to 75% less of the glycosylated creatine than creatine monohydrate. So you'd have to see about, for individual supplementation, I would just compare prices and dosing and see which one was more economical. But if you care about body weight and you're taking creatine, then maybe look into the glycosylated creatine. So, and then this section is creatine in combination with other supplements, because most supplements have creatine in it, added to other supplements. So, and it's basically just says that there's no adverse effects from the creatine by supplementing or by adding in other supplements. So now we get to safety and side effects of creatine supplementation. So while it's not perfect, there have been a few renal health disorders, but those are few and far between. And as stated here, they either didn't follow the recommended dosage, or they had a history of health complications. So they couldn't tack it purely on the creatine. And so they're saying they did studies on the renal function, and so while creatine supplementation increases creatinine levels, it doesn't cause any negative effects to renal function. So again, as long as you don't have any previous health issues and you follow the recommended dosage, you should be fine. All right, so this was the longest duration study, was a retrospective study, which as far as I know, they just asked people who had taken creatine for a long time and asked them if they had any adverse health results from it. So this one, so it said up to 4 years creatine monohydrate supplementation, and through this study they showed that there was no negative health effects. So again, I'm not positive that the retrospective study is this, but it's basically a survey, so you can take this with a grain of salt. So, and they're kind of saying that with, it suggests that there's no negative health effects. So, and I thought this was interesting because I actually didn't know this until I researched the actual data. I believe that creatine supplementation caused more muscle cramps and dehydration because I thought the water retention aspect of creatine supplementation would lead to less water throughout the body, so more muscle cramps. But it makes sense that if you're retaining more muscles or more water in your muscles, that they'll be more hydrated, and therefore you won't get as many muscle cramps. So, and creatine supplementation increases total body water, so it decreases the risk of dehydration. So I thought that was interesting to debunk basically the only negative associated with creatine supplementation. So this is also interesting, but not unexpected that by supplementing with creatine, it reduces the body's normal production of creatine, which, obviously if you're providing it from an outside source, your body doesn't have to make it, so it's not going to. And it did say that the levels returned to normal after a brief period of stopping the supplementation. I'd be interested to see if that happened to the person who supplemented for 4 years up here. They don't mention that. And they also note that the long-term usage of creatine and the subsequent, if they get off of it, 5, 10, 15, 20 years supplementing with creatine, if you get off of it, whether your body will be able to jump back as quickly, if at all, to creating its own source of creatine. So that would be super interesting. That's why most people cycle creatine. They'll do, for X amount, they'll do 20 day or like a week loading, then they'll do 3 weeks supplementing, then they'll do a month off, and they'll do that every other month, which, as far as I can tell, which I'd have to look in the actual study, but since it's a brief period of, since they say it's a brief period to bounce back, I would say that would actually work well to keep your natural production consistent. All right, so, and then just the conclusion from all the stuff above. So it works for strength and hypertrophy resulting from resistance training, improves the quality and benefits of high intensity intermittent speed training, improves aerobic endurance performance in trials lasting more than 150 seconds, seems to produce positive effects on strength, power, fat-free mass, daily living performance, and neurological function in young and older people. So I think they put the seems because it was the neurological function and the older people. So this is just gene expression, which I thought was interesting, which, if your body's going to change, obviously your gene expression is going to change. So your body is literally becoming more fit on a genetic level. So, and then this is also saying that by taking creatine for the aerobic exercise, that there's it possibly reduces your oxygen consumption in submaximal exercise, thereby creating benefits for that exercise. So, and then this is again mentioning that smaller doses during the loading phase throughout the entire day is possibly a better approach to get quicker. Is possibly a better approach to get saturation more quickly and to waste less creatine during the loading phase. So, and then this is what I also found this interesting is that so in order to retain more of the creatine, it's good to take it in conjunction with a carbohydrate and or protein in order to help the body to absorb it more quickly. And then this is the overall summation, is that all of the data that they've been able to find and I've found is that at the very worst, there's no effect from creatine. So again, the only negative renal failures or effects that were seen were people who had previous histories or didn't follow the dosing instructions. So, and then this is just the WebMD. So this summarizes again what we've seen. So this is also interesting that creatine is allowed by the IOC, the Olympic Committee, NCAA, and professional sports. So while it does clearly show performance enhancing results, it's nothing that can't be achieved through diet alone. It's just a supplement that allows you to do it quickly and easily. And then again, this is the saturation point, and the reason you do the loading phase is so that you can reach the saturation point quickly. All right, and so that's my review of creatine monohydrate. If you have any questions or concerns, or if I got something wrong, or you have research that goes against that, again, I've read a couple different articles, most of them being meta-studies, so they're more of a collaboration of different studies, of a bunch of different studies. And so I trust if you can find a bunch of meta-studies that say the same thing without using the exact same studies, then it's a pretty good indicator that that's what the scientific literature says. Overall, creatine, get your diet right first and make sure that you're going to stick to your workout program, and then go for it. Follow whatever the dosage instructions say on your specific supplementation, and you should see some good results. Again, think of creatine and all supplements as a supercharger or a turbocharger, and you got to get your engine in working condition first, and then you can put that baby on there and get some good horsepower and torque. As always, follow the instructions on your supplements and be safe.